I'm going to present a paper or an insight on a paper that we developed at KIT, the Royal Tropical Institute, and I developed it with Helena, and it's based on something else. I think I'm referred to as an agronomist, I heard, and I think I am, but I'm the least agronomist of the three of us, because I have no pictures of crops. Yeah, there's a crop there, and the real agronomist that turns them on. But my pictures are more like people, and I tell you why. Because I wonder if I'm an agronomist. It's a bit like being raised like a Catholic, and then not being a Catholic anymore when you are thinking about it properly. That's me. But yeah, my friends say, well, I do recognize something Catholic in you, so that's the same with agronomy. But why I hesitate to call myself an agronomist is because I have this question: does agronomy actually matter to the rural poor? That's my question. Since I actually study agronomy, does it matter for the rural poor? That's why I'm not going to talk about smallholders again, because all these people on the countryside in Africa, we refer to them as these smallholders. There are 800 million smallholders in the world. That's about everybody, except for 5% of large-scale farmers somewhere. But smallholders, it's not a term, you know. I'm talking about rural poor, okay, if you allow me. So I would like to address that question, whether agronomy matters for the rural poor. So I'll take you to the next slide, if it works. Okay, so some years ago, we had the chance of getting some research funds from a fellow organization called SMV, and they asked the question to KIT: can you help us define a research an agenda which is about smallholder productivity? Because they are thinking about what they can deliver, what they should be working on, and they asked us to help them. And I immediately contacted Helena, because she's much smarter than me, so I needed her to work on this question of, well, does it matter? What does a smallholder production agenda look like for SMV? And we transferred it a little bit, because we think it should deliver on something like reducing poverty. But when doing so, we asked ourselves the question: what is the evidence that agronomy can deliver on reducing poverty? A simple question. And we didn't have the answer after all these years. You know, I worked 10 years in Africa on that topic, and I couldn't answer it. A bit stupid. So I said, let's do a little literature review. Well, but Helena never gets little, so it became a systematic review of literature. Thousands of documents, can you imagine? We screened all literature possible for some evidence that research, agricultural research, has delivered on reducing poverty worldwide. Well, okay, some alignment, some little that, but thousands. We put a student on it. She worked for months, and when she had finished her contract, she was not even halfway. That was 2 years ago, and now Helena is still working on it, bit out of control, I think. And even when we speak, she's still finishing this paper. But meanwhile, we know about it, and we wrote another paper, which is more a public paper, and this is about the conclusions. Now you can have it if you like, but when we started all this, we tried to position this question in what happened actually since the 60s. And this is the picture that we kind of developed. Now, can I ask you to help me interpret this picture? What does it tell you? Does anybody want to try? Nobody? Come on.
Issue. There is a threat. It's red, right?
Yeah. A big one. Nobody? Well, I give my personal interpretation. What I see since the 60s, there is a dominant scientific effort towards crop and livestock intensification. It's called modernization. It has hardly changed, of course. I do not want to challenge too much. There has been plenty of developments there. Research doing this, that, genetics, soil, micronutrients. But Basically, the paradigm is the same. Intensification leads to better world food production. That's what the goal is here. And then in the periphery, you get us. From PRAs and FSR and Farmers First and famous Robert Chambers, I think I mean his institute, livelihoods, whatever. We seem to be confused about our contesting. The contesting, who we are contesting this crop and livestock intensification, doesn't seem very solid. That means we are hopping from approach to approach, while these are pretty solid. So, well, what I know is that we may be working on different goals. Crop and livestock intensification, they want to feed the world. And as the world population grows, we need to intensify agriculture. Well, we, in the periphery here, we want to solve another problem, feeding the rural poor. And that needs other approaches. So who's contesting who? We are contesting the modernists, because they do not deliver on the rural poor, but for the same sake, they are contesting the other approaches because they don't deliver on their world food problem. Well, a perspective. Sorry. Now, this is one of the conclusions that we can draw from our systematic review. Yeah, it's embarrassing. But it is actually true. We didn't find much evidence that agronomy has had a significant impact on the rural poor. And we screened impact evaluations and they were selected on the quality, and those who were not quality we threw away, so it's really a conclusion. So we said, how comes it possible? Because there's so much research that is being done based on that premise that we're going to reduce poverty. So what we saw is that reducing poverty is the claim based on which we get research funding. But in this process of spending all that money, these poor people evaporate. It's really happening. And at the end they are not visible anymore. Well, that's quite a story. Okay, we do have a little bit more detailed conclusions which are interesting as such. Of course we know, and I don't tell you anything to them, if people ever refer to smallholders, don't believe him or her. Because smallholders, that's not a category of farmers. Yeah, it only says that the size of their farms or their livestock is small. But all these other parameters are much more dominant than the size of their farms or their livestock. So that doesn't say much. Well, others are more obvious than that. What we really found, and that's also what you know, but still, it's important to know, is that the rural poor do not depend on their land or land productivity, but they depend on their labor, and the labor productivity. Now think about all that research. It's mostly geared towards raising the productivity per area land, and not the return to labor. You've known that. Many of you must be economists, I guess. So why didn't we see that back in our research agendas? And then a pro-poor agronomy focuses more on a nutritional return to labor, and I will explain you more about that. Who are the rural poor? I don't have to tell you, I think you know. Those are mainly women, for the majority. They live in remote areas. They live off labor, they live off seasonal labor, which makes it even more difficult. And, you know, they also do not benefit from much government or donor spending. 2 weeks ago, Hans Rosling visited the Netherlands and he came to my institute together with Bill Gates. They were at KIT. And Hans Rosling, he had one of these famous presentations. You know him, I think. And one of his statements was that since for the last 10 years, we are spending less and less on remote areas. But these remote areas are where the poor are. So there's less donor and government spending on these people, after all. While we still claim that we are working on poverty reduction all over the spending of donor and government money is getting much lower. That also applies for any claim on Green Revolution. Those years, there was a huge amount of spending of government money on these rural poor. Now we don't see that back, so it will not happen. So where does conventional agronomy fail to reduce poverty? It's much too focused on increasing land productivity. The solutions that we propose require capital or labor investments, and those are the most scarce amongst the rural poor. The checks on the risks, they come last. We develop the technology, and then the final question is, are there any risks? And then we may think of, oh, okay, yeah, maybe there might be a climate risk. But the biggest risks are not integrated in the design of our technology. And the biggest problem is we are addressing a group of households that is not assured of their land claims. And we know all that farmers who do not own the land have a difficulty with managing well that particular property. So in our research we also looked at, is there any clue how we could work on mechanisms to escape rural poverty, or what are these mechanisms after all? And there seems to be an emerging agronomy for the poor, and that's not the agronomy that we know. It's not about production per area, it's much more about nutritional value, it's much more about diversification, and it's much more producing something with a little labor that is remaining after you have sold your labor to your farmer next door. Diversification, very much important, but other things are maybe not agronomy, like a rural economic development agenda, which is absorbing that particular labor that I'm referring to. And can agronomy deliver there? Yes, sometimes, because certain value chains are more requiring quality labor than others. I mean, you should take that into account. And then, yeah, the better labor conditions for the rural poor, maybe agronomy cannot solve that, but for the rural poor, it matters a lot what kind of labor they deliver and how it is being appreciated. We also looked at some cases from SNV, our colleagues, ourselves and our Belgian colleagues. And we drew some lessons that if you're serious about this agenda, reducing rural poverty, including agronomy, what are the immediate guidelines that you could keep in mind? And one of the first is that we should always start at the household and the individuals in the household as a starting point for agenda setting. And not value chains, and not the demand side of consumers. I mean, I am also cursing in the church, because these days we all say, let's first look at the market. If there is a demand for these products that we're all going to produce. Because in the 70s, we were production driven, and that failed. So we must think of consumers. Who are your consumers? But these people are their own consumers. So you don't have to look at the value chain, or the markets, or the institutions. Who cares? Because these people, what they produce is what they eat. So look at them and their household patterns, and what are they missing in their diets. And that should drive your agenda. It's very different. They consider options for risk reducing, because these people are so vulnerable that they cannot assume new technology. And that's a different technology or a different solution than whatever we have proposed before. Look at how their labor can be better remunerated. In terms of if they have some time left, what should they do with it? Gives you another agenda. And developing youth skills is particularly important because the current young people in the African landscape have a different problem than 20, 30, 40 years ago. Because nowadays there are land rights evolving and there are transactions in land, and these people, these young people, will be out of land. Anyway, they will not inherit that land, many of them. So where do they go? Imagine yourselves, where do they go? And you have an image of people moving around to the cities, even beyond. And that's the problem I'm referring to. If we do not create rural employment, real rural employment for these people, we are going to face a huge problem. And that is interdependency. The rural poor depend on the rural rich, well, don't call them rich, the better off smallholders for their labor. That's the first employment opportunity they have. Or they go to the mines or they go elsewhere. This interdependency will exist. And we have to understand the rural poor in that relationship. But that doesn't mean that we cannot do anything. Maybe mechanization, we always think about a richer farmer who will mechanize his or her farm. But we can also help rural people to mechanize their labor. That's a different paradigm, but it will help them a lot. And then, yeah, as I already started my quote on the poor, most of them are women, and many of them are young, and we still fail to involve them in the research agendas. And finally, we should not only talk to these households, heads of households for that reason. So I have only 4 remaining remarks, and I'm well in my time. I think it's well possible to address this issue. But we have to see the rural areas not only as producing raw materials, but as an economy in themselves, where many other things are happening, where services can be delivered, where ICT can be managed by young people to help other farmers get involved, where processing can take place. And we still do not see that as a complete livelihood. It's more than farming alone. And agronomy for the poor means that you still can do something with your agronomy. But it looks different. It implies that you consider the farmer as a consumer, and his household or her household and the children and their diets are like a starting point of your agronomy. What can you add to improve those nutritional situations? And that's a different story. But highly interesting. If you're an agronomist, you should get excited now, I think. And the potential for labor-intensive production and employment should guide the selection process, because that's the only reason, the only way to get to the rural poor, as I just explained. And finally, and we discussed it also in one of these groups, the poor people, they hardly have had any voice in setting research agendas. We talk about the poor, but it's very rare that we sit on a table and we invite the poor to share their concerns with us. And I think that should get more attention than we have done before. Thank you very much.